Today, I'm digging into and doing some sound design with Beam by Lunacy Audio. And right up front, this video is sponsored by Lunacy Audio, so this is not a review. This is an ad, but hopefully still interesting and useful. Lunacy Audio is running a sale right now from July 4th to July 7th, so hit up the link in the description, and I think they're doing a new preset pack as well. That being said, let's jump into the plugin and how I'm using it for some of my own production. So this is Beam. It is a node-based multi-effects plugin with reverbs, granulators and delays, and filters, plus LFOs, an envelope follower, and a cool branching routing system. I mentioned it's node-based. You can get surprisingly in-depth with this in terms of either effects or straight up sound design. So for an example of what this can sound like, I've got this bass sound here. Let me turn this off. Let me turn on a preset that I've got pulled up here. That's pretty impressive. And that's basically your classic shimmer reverb or shimmer delay on steroids. Here's a different take on that same bass sound. Multiple reverbs with different impulses that are built in. And some fun granulation and parallel processing. Here's another simple application. And by the way, all the songs I'm going to be showing you, I made with my MPC 1 and then exported the individual tracks. So by itself, this is one of the MPC plugins. That's a nice sound. Here is a modified preset, which maybe sounds a bit odd on its own, but it makes it fit into the mix really nicely. So to show you the plugin in action, this is what it looks like with no effect loaded onto it. So we choose an effect. Let's do a reverb, and let me turn that off real quick so you can hear the pad we're about to work on. That's what it sounds like dry. Turn this on, turn on the reverb. Let's choose a different one of these. Too much. I like that. Put a granulator before the reverb. Too much. Reverse it. Bit of delay. Filter that signal a bit, I think, because that's a bit harsh. Actually, let's do it before the reverb. And then I want this to be a shimmery layer, so let me put a filter before this. And then bring my dry signal in parallel. And I can turn this up, or solo it, just my shimmer chain. And then say, modulate my cutoff a bit. Turn up the depth of that. We've got a little arpeggiator here. Hey, maybe we could have this. Let's draw something. We could have this escalate over time, maybe. Like in the second half. Turn down my rate. And we can mess with the routing here. So I want to change the polarity of this. And we've still got our dry signal hanging out here. Hell, maybe we filter that down a little bit because we can. A little bit of modulation on this. Before, after. That's a pretty basic shimmer reverb, but hopefully that gives you a pretty good demonstration of what the workflow is like. Here's a preset that I used for the track that I am currently showing you. And then I just stacked on another one. For some nice movement. And then one more preset that I've used with a bunch more parallel processing, because that's kind of this thing's bread and butter. Plus, I should mention, you also have a global mix knob as well. So here's the original sound. And then here, it's just a little subtle bit of washing out of that sound. It doesn't just have to sound pretty, though. It can also sound sinister. So I've got this bass growl here that I'm going to turn down a bit. So here's what happens if we put Beam on that. And then we could take this further, send this down. And just get something nice and unnerving. Which is fun. So in this case, I've got a moving comb filter to just absolutely mess with the pitch. Granulator with, once again, the octaves ARP, which I find myself using quite a bit. Running that in parallel to a filter and a reverb, and then another reverb. And some of these reverbs can sound quite freaky on their own, which can go a long way. Moving on from that, though, here's another PS2 inspired-ish beat, and then I'll show you that techno beat I showed you at the beginning. So we've heard some pretty shimmery sounds, and we've dabbled in spooky sounds a bit, and we'll come back to that. But first, here's another application. Percussion. Here is my percussion bus. And for context, these are literally those little magnets that like stick together that I sampled from YouTube. Don't tell anyone. So now let's turn on all my effects. And I've got a few different instances of Beam here. First of all, a self-made preset. What I wanted to do with this is basically make it sound like it's breathing. And so I've got a granulator here to just throw my percussion around a bit. Lots of width, mix all the way up. Let me turn this stuff off, actually. So this is just the granulator by itself. Then, add some reverb. And then I'm using this stepped LFO to jump this filter back and forth. And then the untouched signal is passing right through, and then all of that is going through another reverb. Which is kind of a freaky reverb. Layer on a preset with the mix turned down a bit. Bit of EQ. And another preset. And this works by tinkering with the delay time with this crazy stepped LFO. Moving on from that, here's another bass sound. And a very complicated looking preset. Just making that sound a little more soundscapey. Or here's another self-made preset. So let me actually show you what I've done here because it's fun. Here's the original. Pretty standard little pad sound. Then we add this. So let me turn all this stuff off. So this first branch here is granulating it, giving it that little pumping sound, 2 octaves up. Wash that out with some modulated reverb. Second branch. Actually, let me turn these off. We're going down an octave this time. Bit of reverb on those grains as well. And then the untouched signal bypasses both of those. Then I wash that out a bit. And then just cut some lows with a filter. Which is pretty cinematic if I do say so myself. This sound right here is just one-shot sample loaded into a key group program, so it sounds pretty static. So let's give it a bit of movement with a preset. And another one. Or we can get this sound to sustain a bit. Turn that on. We've seen this preset before, but now it's doing it on a bell sound. Here's the before. And all those effects come together to fill out the track and give it some movement and life. But the presence of the granulator, the delay, and the reverb got me thinking, could you make a techno kick rumble with this? And the answer is absolutely. So that's fun. A lot of stuff going on here. Let's start off with the rumble. So this is the beam patch that I have created to make it. And actually, you'll notice this branch is dim because I did not end up using it. I just processed the kick and then rendered that entire sound out because it has a little bit of a startup time. It's got to get going and feeding back into itself. So I just looped it twice, took the second loop of it, and then was able to process that a bit further, which I'll show you in a second. But let me get rid of this processing. So just basic 4 on the floor kick. So far, so straightforward. Your first granulator, pitched an octave down, but arping through octaves. Wash that out with a lot of reverb. And then parallel process that. Get more of that pulse back. And you can hopefully hear that reverb. Wait for it. You can see the movement programmed in here for a nice little turnaround. Then I can render that out when it's already going full tilt. A little bit of EQ. Duck it to the kick. And ozone is total overkill for this. The main thing I wanted to do is keep the upper frequencies wide, but narrow down the lower frequencies. This is meant to be a rumble, after all. But I wanted to keep some of those high frequencies. And then while I was at it, I have compressed it a bit and EQ'd it a bit. So before, after, which just cleans and tightens it up a bit. So with the kick, I'm definitely a novice when it comes to making things like hard techno, but I think that sounds cool as hell. And then here's another pass that I did earlier. This was kind of my original attempt before I revamped it. But you can still hear that reverb swell. Moving on to some more percussion, though. Here's what this started life as. It's fun. We can take that so much farther. Also, Lunacy Audio, if you're watching this, and I know you are because you have to approve this video before it goes out, add a distortion module, please. That would be sick. Anyway, let me show you the monstrosity I have created here. So we've got a few different parallel chains going on. Here's our dry signal, and I'm just going to leave this distortion on at this point. So first, granulator. Doing this cool kind of polymetric thing. Octave down, arpeggiated again. Send that into a reverb. A very metallic one. And then in parallel, a bigger, more washed out reverb. And then completely separately, just tame a little bit of high end. And this is how you get your little open hi-hat with a reverb. And all that's being distorted. So we've gotten a lot more metallic percussion and a little bonus open hi-hat out of one singular hi-hat track, which is fun. I've also used a preset on these hi-hats. Before. After. But let us go yet farther. We've got this bell element. Here's without. So just some fairly restrained granulation. Just kind of sprayed around the stereo spectrum a bit. This kind of breathing reverb and a comb filter. And then a second layer of beam. And the goal of this second layer was just to create an 8-bar, essentially a riser where it breaks down into chaos and then bails on it. So I am automating the volume a little bit because I lost a bit of volume doing that. And then I turn my mix all the way down for the drop. So first of all, you'll notice this little movement here. I've got this LFO here set to 8 bars and just ramp up over time. And that LFO is sent to most of these nodes and often multiple parameters per node. So let me just start this from the beginning. Here's the granulator. So the detune is getting turned up. The mix is getting turned up. My delay time is getting turned up over time. And the size and rate have a bit of randomization turned up as well. So that's a nice dissonant bit of chaos, but we can take that further. Of course we can. Spooky. So this is ramping up in mix from that first LFO, and then this delay time is bouncing back and forth. And my rate is changing. Getting faster and faster. Bring in a more chaotic reverb. Honestly, I probably could have stopped there. But let's move a comb filter around. Another reverb on top of that. And one more filter with just a moving little peak. And then I can kind of bring in that little riser effect whenever I want it, like at the end of this drop. Have it very quickly drop in. I've done a bit of processing on this percussion bus with a modified preset. So what started off as a bunch of one-shots gets a little bit of extra texture. And then this guy I'm automating the mix on with this preset. So here's the original as processed in the bus. Some fun little wobbles. And finally, this alternate rumble that has been like resampled a gajillion times with a few other pieces of software. Here's what it originally sounded like. And then I believe this preset plays around once again with the granulator and delay. And then I threw another preset on top of that, and we get this, which transforms it quite a bit. So what I can actually do in an arrangement is drop this in unprocessed first, and then drop in the kind of glitched up version of it. And finally, one more modified preset. So this reverb is also adding some delay. And then the granulator spreads that out. And we get it to sound metallic with this last reverb. Aptly named Dumpster Dive, which is funny. So that's how I've been using Beam lately. Thank you once again to Lunacy Audio for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching. I've got some related videos up here if you're at all interested, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.